So they told us they'd invited him. They hadn't contacted him. By the way, we had to go there with 8 bodyguards, just so you know.
Oxford Union itself censored part of the debate.
Actually, amusingly, he didn't really leave. He went upstairs to the gallery where he thought people wouldn't notice he was still there, because I think he wanted to hear what happened. It was very clear to me the entire row behind us was wearing hijabs and cursing in Arabic and disrupting my speech and all the others. So it was designed to be intimidatory. She's wearing red triangle earrings to symbolize the Hamas symbol that they used in their videos showing when they were going to kill Israelis, the little red triangle. It's become a symbol of Palestinianism.
Hello, I'm here today with Jonathan Sacerdoti. Welcome. Jonathan is quite unique because he's been part of quite a controversial event. Jonathan, you've been in the Oxford debate about Israel, right? The notion was that Israel was an apartheid state, is an apartheid state. What else was it there? Guilty of genocide?
So it was the Oxford Union, which is the Oxford University's debating society, though technically it's entirely independent. And the motion for debate, which is how they do these things, was this House believes, and then the topic for discussion, which is Israel is an apartheid state guilty of genocide. So they put it a double whammy.
Yeah, it's a double. It's interesting because it's not just debating a notion that Israel is an apartheid state, and not just debating the fact that Israel is committing genocide. It's both. Right?
Yeah,
so that's
you might think they had an agenda, right?
Maybe, who knows? You know, who decides what's the topic of debate? Like, how does it work?
So the way the Oxford Union works is that you can think of it as a sort of kindergarten for Westminster, for our parliament. And anyone who's seen the video and is familiar with the union will see it's these old buildings, lots of wood, the benches facing each other from both sides, just like the House of Commons. And it's no coincidence that many prime ministers and other senior politicians have been involved when they were students in the Oxford Union, because the way it works is that there is a committee voted for every term. It's run by students and other students vote for them. They have to be members of the union, but to be a member of the union you have to be a member of the university and then pay a subscription. And so they don't just learn debating there, they learn all of the filthy art of politics and backroom deals and being elected and backstabbing and what have you. And then once they are elected, they set the agenda for their term. So ultimately, the president has climbed his way up to the top, a bit like a prime minister, and then he gets to choose the agenda for that term. Oxford terms are 8 weeks long, so that's 8 debates, and probably the same number of speaker events. They hold some events that aren't debates, and they decide who to invite to those debates, what the debate's about. And so the president, he's now ex-president from that term, was very proudly the first Arab president of the Oxford Union, and thus spent a lot of his 8 weeks focusing on Israel with some really heavily biased speakers, and of course this hideous debate that didn't just choose one of the slurs against Israel, but both of the main slurs against Israel, and then packed the room to be against us, tried to weight the teams for us to lose, and did everything he could really to make it a very unfair and uninformative.
I have so many questions about that. I'll start with, okay, first of all, it's a big deal, the Oxford Union, right? It's not just this debate, you know, it's not like having a debate in the Ben Gurion University in Beersheba in Israel, right? It's a pretty big deal. So is that because of the prestige, and second, the fact that it goes online and usually becomes very popular and gets a lot of views, and also because these people, many of them probably become politicians later, right? Am I missing something, or
so
is there?
I'm not. That is correct. It's high profile for a number of reasons. You've listed a few of them there. So the videos tend to do very well online. They tend to do very well online because of the prestige of the institution, the organization. That tends to be the case because it's Oxford University. You know, I was an undergraduate at Oxford University some 20-something years ago, and I was familiar with the union as a result of that. And in fact, I was a debater at school. It's a sort of British public school activity that some people do. I think it's actually an extremely important thing that I did in my formative years, because it enables you to learn to speak fluently and persuasively, hopefully, and it enables you to think on your feet. This is kind of the biggest challenge of debating as a activity, as a sort of pursuit. You get given often a motion for debate that you don't know a huge amount about, or you don't have the strongest opinion on in the first place, but you have to then go in like a sport, really, but without the physical exertion. And you have to make your arguments, argue your case, respond to the other side, rebut their case. So I think it's a really worthwhile pursuit for helping people think, helping people persuade others, helping people work out the facts and arguments on both sides. And for me, it's always been a really good way to work out what I think about certain topics, to listen to others. And often, the debate ends in a vote, one way or the other. But often, the reality is the viewer or even the debater comes out having better understood both sides, and it helps you sometimes not to decide, which I think is something we're a bit weak at these days. I think that my experience in the Oxford Union for this debate was that audience, at least, are not good at having shades of grey.
Yeah, we'll get to that. We'll get to that. But so the mere fact that this notion was up to debate, like this double whammy of genocide and apartheid, should kind of make Israelis sweat that this is being debated at the Oxford Union, or like how do you see this?
Well, I don't think it's news to any Israelis. I don't think it's news to Jews. I don't think it's news to anyone that these are the sorts of things that are being debated on campuses, whether it's Oxford or Harvard or anywhere else. And that's because I think for decades we have allowed an infiltration of our institutions from top to bottom, whether it is university campuses in places that matter less than Oxford, or whether it is local politics in Western countries, or whether it is parliamentary politics, whether it's media institutions, the BBC, CNN, anywhere else. There are very few places where I think the long reach of some quite nefarious forces has not made itself known and sometimes taken control. So these words, genocide and apartheid, didn't just become big in relation to Israel in the last 14 months. They were able to be activated, let's say, because the groundwork had been laid for so long. So, for example, Israel Apartheid Week was this absurd thing they did on many Western campuses for many years, which most people were completely unaware of. But it's literally an Iranian-sponsored.
I was not aware of this.
Right.
Israel Apartheid Week, it's like a thing?
Yes, Israel Apartheid Week. It's
please
an
don't tell me
Iranian-sponsored activity that takes place.
Please don't tell me that
campuses.
it falls on the same week of Al-Quds Day that's also celebrated in Iran.
I would need to double check, but I think it might. And that's the point. Even Al-Quds Day, which there's an Al-Quds Day march in London every year. Most people don't know about it because there's all sorts of loony marches in London.
Oh, okay. Just to make it clear for the audience, Al-Quds is the Arab word for Jerusalem, right? So Al-Quds Day is like how we lost Jerusalem to the infidels and how we have to liberate it and something like that, right?
Yeah, but so the point being, though, that why is Iran sponsoring an Al-Quds Day? Iran's nowhere near Jerusalem. So for those who don't know, that's the point. This was never a big deal. It just seemed a bit crazy. And there were these people that would go on Al-Quds Day and march through central London, and they were allowed every year. And there are then groups that would counter them, mostly of Jews, who would go on the streets and stand in their way. And it would just be seen as one of these kind of turf wars. They'll leave them to it, a curse on both their houses. But the reality is that because there was that attitude, the groundwork was laid for many years. We just tolerated and allowed some preposterous things to happen. So when October the 7th happened, then it was very easy for them to flick that switch. All the groundwork was laid. People were primed for it. And that's really how I opened my speech in that debate, was that I said...
Oh, you did great. We'll get to the debate. I think you had a great speech, but...
Well, just to complete that thought, Joe, it's just to say that I felt that debate and the broader debate that's gone on since October the 7th relied on an appeal to prejudice, not to intelligence or thought or openness. And that's what happened. That's why the words apartheid and genocide have been so easily applied to Israel. And now it's at the ICJ. So why? Because people were primed for it and they didn't even know that was happening.
When I watched the debate, what I was, it seemed like your side, you and the guys on your against the notion, were basically debating, coming up with arguments, showing things, saying things. But the other side was like in an evening of poetry slam. I told you this before we started recording. It was just like people coming up and saying things that they already assume that everybody else agrees with. It was so weird to hear. There were no real arguments coming up, except like the only type of argument that I've heard was, I think it was from the second speaker maybe. He was giving anecdotes, like single cases that are supposed to shock you. The person hearing it should be shocked that such a terrible thing happened to Palestinians. But it really wasn't an argument, right? It's because you could do the same for the other side, the exact same. So it was so weird, and the crowd was always cheering for them and always booing you guys. Well, not exactly booing, but like, interrupting and okay, we'll get to that. I'm sorry. We'll get to the debate itself. But could you tell me, what was it like to go up into this debate, entering the room and realizing that you're basically entering a room full of Islamists? Like what happened there? Because I could tell from the recording that the audience was very hostile against you guys. It was always clapping in approval of the other side. I guess you guys you had like your little corner of supporters or something, but like what happened there? How did
Well,
it
not
happen?
really, by the way. That was very notable. So we counted 4 Jews in the room because they kind of made themselves known. 2 of them gave floor speeches. So in the middle of the debate, after each side has presented 2 speakers, there's an opportunity for the students to come and give speeches themselves, short ones. And those aren't recorded or put on the website ever. So you don't hear those. But there were a couple of Jewish speakers who came and spoke, and I must say I thought they were incredibly brave to do so. It was a hideously hostile room, and most Jews had told us, who we'd contacted before or after, that they just wouldn't go anywhere near that because it didn't feel safe or informative or honest. So I think that's...
It was not honest.
No. And so when you say there was our small corner of supporters, I actually don't think there really were. I was amazed when the vote result came through that there were 50 odd votes in our favour. I mean, something like 300 the other side. I don't remember the exact numbers, but I was actually quite surprised that we got that many, because it was never about the vote. I don't care about the vote. As I said, and debating is a form of entertainment, but it's a form of entertainment that's meant to be informative, and often there is rhetorical or verbal acrobatics, and that's part of the fun. And watching people rebut one another's comments, and often do so with humour, that's a good way to cut people down. Now, I thought because of the subject matter, it was very unlikely that I would engage in much of that, because I didn't consider this entertainment, and I didn't consider this grounds for joking. It is a deadly serious topic. It is, in fact, in my opinion, the topic, the question, the dilemma, the problem of our generation. And I think the world is fast realizing that. I don't mean Israel or Palestinians. I mean the wider chaos that is actually quite a small detail of. And so I didn't go there to show off my rhetorical abilities. I went there to confront what I knew would be a hostile room, and I didn't know it would be that hostile. I had no idea there would be such a level of dishonesty for having filled the room, not just with people that didn't agree with us deliberately, but with aggressive, nasty, disruptive people who had no intention of letting us speak, get through a speech, make an argument, or persuade them. And that is the real thing that I think caught the attention of the world, because this has actually resonated internationally. I've had so
Because
many
it was crazy.
interviews.
Because it was crazy. You saw like, okay, just to give the audience like a bit of a taste, there were several. First of all, Oxford Union itself censored parts of the debate. Like if you go online and you try to look for the debate, you will see parts of it cut out. You will soon tell us why these parts were cut out, right? But I promise it's interesting. They censored themselves, like they censored the debate. There were instances of members of the audience being escorted out. There was an instance of one of your speakers on your side being asked to leave while he was delivering his address. It was crazy.
Yeah.
So let's start with, I think the first weird event that happened was that girl who yelled and who was escorted out or something like that. So what happened there?
So I spoke first on my side. There was one speech before me, which was a guy called Mohammed Al-Kurd, who some people may know of. He has a massive following online. During one of the earlier clashes between Israel and the Palestinians, he came to prominence on Instagram. He is a Palestinian who is studying in America, I think, poetry. So your idea that it's like a poetry slam is interesting. He gave a speech. I mean, again, I'm not saying this to trash talk him. It was just a feeble speech. It wasn't great. It wasn't really in the spirit of a debate.
He said he
He
wasn't
came,
there to debate. He openly
right.
said it.
He said there is no debate. That's exactly. He said we shouldn't be debating this. There is no debate over this topic, and certainly I won't talk or debate with those people. And then he left as soon as he'd finished his speech. He left. He sort of flounced out. Actually, amusingly, he didn't really leave. He went upstairs to the gallery where he thought people wouldn't notice he was still there because I think he wanted to hear what happened. But
Okay.
that's fine. I mean, he would have been welcome to sit downstairs like a grown-up and listen rather than sort of listening from the staircase while the grown-ups tried to have a conversation. The truth is that I then spoke, and yes, I know now that it was 8 minutes into my speech that this massive upheaval took place. So I was actually, it's very interesting because I tried to stick as much as I could to facts and information in making my argument. Obviously, I had a view and I was trying to put it through to them, but there was one section where I talked about the count of calories that has made it through into Gaza during the war. And I drew on the statistics that are available from Kogat, the unit of the Israeli army that deals with Palestinian welfare. And I also compared that with the recommended number of calories per day for British men according to the National Health Service of the UK. Now, on average, the number of calories in aid that's gone into Gaza during the war, according to those figures, is higher per person than the average number of calories recommended for a man in the United Kingdom. And as I went on to say, the Gazan people, on average, per person, are receiving more than the world average in calories. Now, that's just a statistical fact based on those figures. It's not to say that there is no hunger or suffering in Gaza, which is
Yeah,
what I
it's
said.
just a statistical fact. It could be
Right.
that it's not reaching them or that Hamas is taking them. But
Correct.
yeah,
But
okay.
before I even had a chance to go there, there was this almighty scream of liar, really the top of her voice from this woman, who again, interventions are allowed in the debate. So there is the possibility to politely intervene. What you have to do, it's again, it's part of their process. You can say on a point of information and offer the speaker an opportunity to let you interject. It's meant to be about what you just said. So if she felt I was lying, she could have said, on a point of information, according to such and such, or these statistics, or this NGO, those figures are inaccurate, or whatever it might be she might have had to say. But she didn't. She screeched liar at me. And then it wasn't just that. It went
Was
on.
she a
You know, it was,
Muslim or what was she like?
I don't know her. Looking at her, I mean, I made a video in which you can see her because when this did kick off, my husband filmed her. So they didn't show her in their film of it. As you say, they censored all of this abuse. What happened at this moment in the official release from the Oxford Union is the cameras pulled out to a wide shot. So you could just see general chaos, but nothing specific. And the microphones were muted for around 2 minutes, completely. So on the video, there's just this 2-minute dead time in the middle of my speech where something's happening. So I happened to have recorded it myself on my iPhone, just to have, so that I could listen to it afterwards and share it with others privately. But I decided that given that they released the video and censored the level of abuse that
It
I
was
got.
not the only censored part. There were more censored parts. We'll get to that.
I don't believe they cut any of my actual speech for
No,
my
not you,
speech.
not
There
your
were other
speech.
parts. Yeah, we'll get to
Yeah.
that in a sec. But so what I'll say is, I did a simple, overdub in Adobe Premiere. I put on my audio on their video, and I also added the small bit of footage of the actual disruptor because I had it. And they forbade us from filming. They actually stopped him filming her. But as far as I was concerned, it's perfectly valid. I was at risk. By the way, we had to go there with 8 bodyguards, just so you know. That was the advice that we got independently. We had to pay for the majority of that. They wouldn't. So given that that was the case for a debate, it is telling that they then hid that part of the speech, and she then went on to scream, you genocidal mother effer, you know, F you. It didn't stop. At which point, Yosef Haddad, who is on my team, Israeli Arab, very cool guy, stood up and said, you should kick her out. She's cursing. The president didn't. The president is, again, meant to sort of preside over the whole thing fairly. He didn't do anything. Eventually, we just insisted. We said, you know, if you don't get rid of her, I can't speak over that. If you don't get rid of her, we won't carry on. All four of us will leave. And that was basically the outcome. So they then did kind of reluctantly take her out. They tried to kick out my husband, Amir, because he filmed her. I mean, he took out a camera just to film this woman abusing me. They tried to kick him out for that. So it was really it was sort of like a mafia organized thing rather than anything else. And you mentioned a moment ago that the second speaker for the proposition, the anti-Israel side, was the only moderately conforming speech.
No. That's not what I meant. I meant that he was the only one whose speech didn't sound like, okay, there were four speakers, right? Mm-hmm. Four speakers on their side. So two of them sounded like they were just here for poetry. Like the first guy and the last lady, they were just telling, I don't know, they weren't even telling.
Well, so let me just interrupt there. He was a poetry student in America, and returned to the West Bank to become an Instagram celebrity anti-Israel propagandist. And she is apparently a Palestinian novelist. So it's no surprise. And I do remember as she gave that speech, you know, it was very sort of poetic about the olive trees and the earth, and you, meaning the Jews, will never understand the earth because you're not connected to it. It was all that sort of stuff. I did actually whisper that next to me that this is like a poetry slam. So it is actually interesting that was what you thought. But the second speaker this is the weird thing, he was the president, the guy that invited us, the Egyptian Arab president of the Union, decided to step down from his throne upon high, where he's meant to be independently chairing the debate, and give a speech against us.
Does
and
this
the reason
have a
he did that, he was the president, and the reason he did that is because what happened in the organization of all this, it was also quite set against us. So the organization was such that they deliberately tried to stitch us up. They invited on the anti-Israel team two high-profile anti-Israel Jews, Miko Peled and Norman Finkelstein. Yeah. Now, I would say that again was quite a declaration. These are not people whose opinions I think are considered and reasonable in this debate. They've made a name for themselves putting them out there because they're very inflammatory and they make good television. So people like Piers Morgan love to have Norman Finkelstein on. Now, there are plenty of people who could debate a Palestinian perspective fairly. I mean, I do it all the time as part of my work. I know that there are different outlooks on the facts and the circumstances, but they didn't invite any of them. They invited the angriest, nastiest people they could for that debate. Now, Finkelstein pulled out because at the last minute on our side, one of the speakers that had been scheduled on our side, I think got a bit afraid, got cold feet and pulled out. And so I suggested that we should contact Mosab Hassan Youssef, who I think is an extraordinary person, who I had the privilege to get to know during the couple of days around this debate. And he instantly said yes. Just to be clear with the background, they told us on my advice that they would invite him. I gave them his contact details. I then spoke with him, with our team, and found out that they had not invited him at all. So they told us they'd invited him. They hadn't contacted him, but he told us he was available and he wanted to do it. So on that basis, we suggested to them that the invitation had effectively been made and he had effectively said he could do it, and that actually none of us would come if he didn't. And so they reluctantly allowed him to come. And that is why he spoke on our side. Now, they tried to kick him out in the middle of his speech.
Yeah, we'll get to that.
They utterly hated him. And the reason that he and Yosef Haddad stood up in my defense, incidentally, when I was interrupted, is because much of the abuse taking place in the room was in Arabic. Now, I don't speak Arabic, but they do. So I still don't know exactly what was said. I know some of what was said in his speech. But this was a truly horrible environment.
Yeah, and people called him a scumbag as he was speaking. As he got up, people started yelling like...
I translated it. Again, they didn't release his speech for a very long time, so I had an audio note of that. So I spent a lot of time subtitling it because it wasn't the best quality. My audio note was done from next to me, but I wasn't my phone wasn't next to him when I recorded that one. So I subtitled it. I've put scumbag because after a bit of research online, that was the most appropriate translation. But the word, if I can say it, was shalmut, which is actually more like
Oh,
prostitute.
yeah,
But for a man, the internet seemed to tell me it has less of a sexual connotation and more of a general scumbag or traitorous or you're available for purchase sort of attitude. So scumbag is what I wrote, but
Wait a second, but why did Norman pull out then?
so he pulled, well, as far as we know, he pulled out when we booked Mosab. And I think they have an ongoing, Mosab is very happy to debate him. I don't think he wants to debate Mosab. So that was the situation. And I mean, listen, the Oxford Union, I mean, we could talk about all the details of it for a long time, and I think it's perfectly valid to, but I would say that it's a broader issue that we have here, which is that there is a closing of the mind of students and others, even at the finest universities in the world. And that room was, yes, only 300-400 people, mostly handpicked to be abusive.
They were
But,
handpicked? Like,
well,
did the union pick
the
who's
union
coming?
had complete control over who could come. Only members of the union could ask for tickets, and not everyone who asked got in. And I heard from many people that the room was filled and closed hours before the debate started. I heard from one person that contacted me. I mean, I've had so many messages from around the world, from people in Oxford, from people around the world, high level to low level, ordinary people. This has really resonated with so many people. But among those in Oxford who told me they tried to go, they said they couldn't get in. Some told me that as they were going in, they were directed where to sit by a member of the union committee, so that it was very clear to me the entire row behind us was wearing hijabs and cursing in Arabic and disrupting my speech and all the others. So it was designed to be intimidatory. But what I was saying is that I think this is symbolic of the closing of the minds of our students and of that generation. In discussion, there's a dinner before the event in which they treated us also very rudely. My husband left the room briefly during the dinner and was chatting with some of the students. And it was very interesting how he's Israeli, how they explained to him how it was. They said that the facts weren't important. The perception of Israel is all that mattered. And so even if we could make an argument about the actual facts and thoughts and concepts that might be important, all that really mattered was their perception. So it's that kind of idea that your feelings, your gut reaction, your primed prejudices will always outweigh anything that we could say. And I think
Now
that
it makes sense.
Yeah.
Because the debates themselves, like the things that they were saying, they were not saying arguments. They were telling stories. They
Yeah.
were telling you the narrative and the way that they want you to see it, right?
And I think depressingly, if you speak to kind of communications advisors and people like that these days, they often will tell politicians or other speakers, concentrate on stories, concentrate on feelings, concentrate on anecdotes. And I think it's a sort of human hack that people know that that's what works and that that's what's persuasive. But I'm a great believer in the power of argument and factual conversation, and that's why discussions like those you have online are really important, because there are plenty of people who aren't just swayed by gut feelings. And I'll say this, I said it there in other words, it's horrible and tragic to watch a war. There is no question in my mind that it's horrible watching what is happening to innocent people on all sides of this war, as in any war. But that in itself is not a simple argument against all war, because the alternative is not just peace. The alternative to a war against a psychopathic, barbarous civilization, if you can even call it a civilization, the alternative is not just to let them be, because the whole point is they burst across a border and raped and murdered and kidnapped and burnt people alive and dead, and said they would do it again and again and again if they could. And 2 or 3 years before, people drove through the UK from Bradford down to London with Palestinian flags on their cars shouting through megaphones that they want to fuck the Jews, rape their daughters, rape their mothers. And those people never got arrested here. But on October the 7th, 2023, people who convene under the same flag burst across the Israeli border, fuck the Jews, rape their daughters, and rape their mothers. So I say that it's important that we listen to what people tell us about their intentions and their ideology, and that if it could happen in Israel, it could happen here. And that's why I do think that my general appeal more broadly on this topic and plenty of others is, let's look at the facts, let's listen to what people tell us they really mean instead of fantasizing about what we would like them to mean. And that is basically what I went there to do, regardless of this subject, that it's an important one.
Okay, so I want to jump to Miko Peled, the guy who was speaking for the notion. He's a Jewish guy, very anti-Israel. He was speaking basically on the team against you. And what struck me very much on Miko Peled's speak, well, there were one event that you will surely talk about because it was censored, the way I could see it. Because there was he broke the law basically while speaking or something like that. He went up and basically, again, you said that there were, as we said, there were no arguments. It was all about feelings. Because I don't know if everyone's noticed this, but he went up and he basically started speaking about how it's ridiculous that it's being debated that Israel was an apartheid state. And then it was time to present his argument. But instead, he told a story. He told a story about one time he was in some country, I think it was in Africa, I don't remember, and he met a guy, and that guy asked him, why do you say that Israel is an apartheid state? And then Miko tells the story, and he goes like, and then when I proved to him that Israel was an apartheid state, because it's so easy to prove, he became convinced. And then I was thinking to myself, like, wait a second. The guy comes up here, and he's like, do you want me guys to convince you that Israel is an apartheid state? Okay, let me tell you a story about that time I convinced the guy that Israel is an apartheid state. But he doesn't tell you the arguments. He doesn't tell you how he convinced the guy. He just tells you, listen, I convinced the guy. It was super easy. So and I was like, this is ridiculous. Is this the Oxford Union?
It's true. In fact, there were some other ridiculous parts of his speech. And I might say that among the people who were there abusing us, there are pictures of him with one of them after the debate, arm in arm sort of thing, as friends. She's wearing red triangle earrings to symbolize the Hamas symbol that they used in their videos showing when they were going to kill Israelis, the little red triangle. It's become a symbol of Palestinianism and a specific reference to killing. She was wearing earrings of that. I researched her afterwards because in the film we had, I found out who she is. Her name is Naila Kausar. She's a very well-known anti-Israel, pro-Palestinian, I would say, possibly pro-Hamas activist. But so in his speech, he started peculiarly. I mean, if we're going to analyze the speech itself, he started by saying this was actually about values. It wasn't really a debate about the things that we were talking about. So these specific words they'd used, genocide and apartheid, we shouldn't debate them. We shouldn't define them, which I also did by reference to the international law that the rest of the world uses to define those two terms. They are specifically legal terms as well as ethical and moral ones. But he, and incidentally, they doesn't qualify on either, I would say, quite firmly. But that's the other discussion. He said there's no debate here. It's about values. One side kills babies, the other side doesn't. The side that kills babies is wrong, which showed not only a dishonesty or ignorance, but it's sort of idiocy, because they did kill babies. They have always killed babies. When they blew up restaurants, when they blew up pizzeria, when they blew up nightclubs, they killed babies, they killed teenagers, they killed everyone. They're actually holding a baby
I legit think
hostage.
it's crazy.
They're holding a baby hostage right now if he's still alive. Kfir Bibas is a baby in Gaza, famous the world over because Hamas literally kidnapped that baby. So for him to stand up and open the speech with that showed his dishonesty. He then said at one point that October the 7th wasn't terrorism. Israel's reaction was terrorism. The actions of October the 7th, he said, were heroic or heroism. And I did intervene. I asked the president at that point politely if he could invite in the police who are outside, because under the Terrorism Act of 2000 in the UK, to give support to a prescribed terrorist organization such as Hamas is illegal in the UK. He's been reported to the police, and the police are interviewing people. I know, in fact, they're coming to speak to me about it.
And this was censored from the online discussion. Like
All
the
of
part
that
where
was taken out.
Yeah,
from
the part
his
where he
speech
said
online.
it was censored. Like I saw there was like a cut, and I knew
Yeah.
that there was some event that he said something. So this is what you're describing. So this is
Yeah.
the second censoring of the debate,
Yes.
basically.
And they also censored the last speaker on their side's speech. I'm actually haven't found out what it is they've censored, but amusingly, she has now accused them of being under the influence of Zionists, and she wants to sue them. So the idea that again,
What?
the idea that you could come out of that debate on the other side and say that it had been somehow influenced by or biased towards Israel and Zionists or Jews or whatever it is absurd, especially after all the coverage it got. I don't think they should have cut her speech. I don't think they should have cut Miko Pelled's speech. I think they should publish all the speeches. In fact, they normally publish the speeches individually, as they've done. I think they should publish the entire debate from start to finish. They can take out the student speeches if that's some issue for them. They should publish the whole thing. I call on Ibrahim Osman Mawafi, the former president of the Oxford Union, to do just that. If he is proud of what he did, he ought to show it to everybody. There's great interest in it. My speech alone on my version with the abuse in has gone over 1 million views online.
Wow.
Within a few days. He obviously isn't proud of what he did once there is scrutiny on it from around the world. And that's shown by all of the censorship, and this is for an institution which is known as the last bastion of free speech. Well, the last bastion of free speech has fallen under the presidency of Ibrahim Osman Mawafi, the first Arab president of the Oxford Union. And that is a great shame for the Oxford Union. It's a great shame for Oxford University. It's a great shame for British academia. It's a great shame for free speech. It's a great shame for free thought. It's a great shame for everything. And it's more than a shame. It's actually a massive problem because it's emblematic of what's happening across the whole country. And yet we're not allowed to talk about it in real frank terms. We're often told that we're racist or Islamophobic if we draw any attention to the influence of Islam in these sorts of strategies. And I think that's a massive problem. I keep saying this. If there is an ideology or a philosophy, whether it calls itself a religion or not, which has very strong opinions about whether I get to live or die, and its opinion is pretty strongly that I should die, I have every right to discuss it and criticize it openly and to name it. And then I'll have a debate about it. I'll have a discussion about it. I will be delighted if I can be convinced that I'm wrong about it. This is the other thing that has just fallen out of fashion, is the ability to have an open discussion in which you change your mind. The internet is full of videos of
It was not an open discussion. Like again, as I said, the debaters on the opposite side, they were not really putting out arguments. They were just saying like it's a poetry slam essentially. And you said that even the first speaker was not even so unwilling to debate that he just completed his speech and then left. Although you tell me that he was actually hiding upstairs, and also, as you guys were speaking, you kept getting interrupted, and the crowd was yelling stuff like "shame, shame," like or something like that.
That was the least bad. I mean, so there is a tradition that you can, the odd interjection, shame or hear, hear. This is about as raucous as it's meant to get in a debate. But there was an orchestra of coughing, jeering, giggling. They giggled when I talked about my father, who was a Holocaust survivor.
Yeah, I heard that, I think.
People wrote online who were against this, oh, you can't judge everything as not a genocide if it's not as bad as the Holocaust. But that wasn't my argument. I did mention the Holocaust as an illustration of a genocide that we can all agree on. I mentioned Rwanda as an illustration of a Holocaust, of a genocide we can agree on. The point is that under any reasonable, objective, rational discussion of what's happened in Gaza, it doesn't qualify, even if it's horrible, and even if you might think things have been done wrong or even illegally, and I would dispute much of that, but it doesn't make it a genocide. As I said, if you lose a war, an unnecessary war that you started, that doesn't just automatically classify as genocide. So that's a whole other conversation. I think all of this is very symptomatic of what's happening in Britain on a larger scale. And I think that's why people latched onto this story and are continuing to. I mean, it's quite a few weeks ago now, and
Yeah.
I'm still talking about it. On the one hand, I'd like to get on and talk about the the broad other topics that I deal with, but actually this touches on so many of them, because to be accused of Islamophobia for talking about things like this is a massive problem. And it's the same everywhere in British society, that if you point out these sorts of problems, I mean, we have, for example, 4 MPs in our last election in July who stood as independents and won against mostly Labour Party candidates. And they did so on a ticket that was basically focused around Gaza.
Oh,
Now,
is that the
Gaza,
Muslim vote? Is that Muslim vote
yes,
group
there was
thing?
a
Okay.
website called the Muslim Vote. So they have named it the Muslim Vote. They helped Muslim voters, supposedly, choose candidates who would beat Labour Party candidates or Conservative Party candidates
Yeah.
who they felt had underperformed in their condemnation of Israel's actions in Gaza. And so what we ended up with was 4 so-called independent members of parliament whose very platform that they'd stood on was the Muslim vote and Gaza. Now, Gaza is a sort of code word in this case, because
Yeah.
actually their position on Gaza doesn't matter a jot for what happens in Gaza. It's completely irrelevant. Britain is pretty much completely irrelevant in terms of what's happening in Gaza or what Israel is doing. I mean, it's proven that with its fairly feeble but dreadful statements since this government in particular came into power, the partial embargo on Israel, the failure to do very much about the hostages.
Although I've noticed that the Muslims in Britain, they try to make it seem as if the UK is playing this huge role in Gaza, right? So I guess it's to get people to vote for them or something.
Well, look, I mean, maybe that is their view, that Britain has some sort of massive influence in Middle Eastern foreign policy. I've yet to see much evidence of that. Even in terms of arms or parts for weapons, even with this partial embargo, the impact is more symbolic than actual. So, when I've been at the Israel aerospace industries, or I've been to Rafael last week while I was there, I've spoken with military figures and analysts. They're not worried about this in terms of it actually impeding their ability to carry out the war. They are more concerned about it in the highly symbolic and sense that it shows a government trying to hijack Israel's efforts to survive, to target an enemy that did what it did. So it's a problem when we end up with 4 MPs who now, by the way, unsurprisingly, along with Jeremy Corbyn, who many will remember, the former leader of the Labour Party, who was also a ferocious anti-Israel campaigner all of his life, they are now sort of uniting within Parliament. There are whispers of them even trying to set up a political party. Now, that would be basically an Islamic political party in the British Parliament.
It's clear that it's just a matter of time, though. But I digress. Could we get back to what happened when Hassan Mosab Youssef was speaking? Because
Yes.
I think he was also censored. There was an event in which the president told him to get out. Like, what happened there?
So in Mossab's speech, I'm not sure any of the speech was cut from the video, but here's the thing about how they video it. They have microphones in the room, which are used for amplification, but also, I think, separately to record an audio track for the videos. And they have, I think, 3 fixed cameras on the walls, which are movable. So they obviously video all of their debates in this style, and then they send it away to an editor, a third-party company, and they do an edit. So I assume that part of that is that they do a sound mix where they dip in and out of what they want you to hear. And the president has a hand mic for when he needs to interject, because there's chaos. So again, they did eventually publish Mossab's speech. That was after a very rigorous amount of scrutiny in the media for them not doing so.
Yeah, why didn't they do it? I don't understand.
Very good reason. A very good question. They published some of the speeches after about a week. They said they were going to publish them all, and they just didn't. They held on to, I think it was Miko Peled and Mossab. Now, I heard that the Miko Peled one was because they were concerned that if they published it, they were publishing him calling Hamas's actions heroic, and that in itself could perhaps have legal implications for them. So they got around that one by eventually publishing it and cutting out
Yeah,
that
cutting out
part.
that part.
And not making that clear on the video, by the way. There is no clear indication if you're watching it that there is a cut. As you
Yeah.
said, you can spot it if you look for it. Now, they then also pulled down various of the videos they'd already published, my own included. For mine, they reintroduced all the sound they'd taken out because I think they realized it's out there anyway, they may as well. So they introduced back the abuse, but they bleeped parts of it. And that, of course, it's not a major concern to me, but it has the added effect of removing all of the many hundreds of comments that were
Yeah.
under the video that were
And it
condemned.
also cancels, it's not good for the algorithm, right? Because people are not going to click it. They've already seen it. So
Yeah.
it destroys the reach of the video. So it's convenient to do that.
Well, I think also it adds another element, which is these days of some importance. The view count is drastically lower than it was, and in due course, in the sort of historical record, it will look like it was a much less popular speech, etc.
Yeah.
But I mean, I'm not bothered by that personally. So Mosab's speech was powerful and authoritative. So I think he also is a brilliant speaker for this topic because he has a unique experience. The guy is the son, for those who don't know, he's the son of one of the founders of Hamas. And his father is a senior leader in Hamas, or has been. So he, around the age of 18, was arrested by the Israelis, as I think he was smuggling weapons, and was put in prison. There's a brilliant book he's written and a film of it, The Green Prince, Son of Hamas, rather, which explains it all, and I recommend it to people. To cut that long story short, he became an informant for the Israelis, helping them to stop countless suicide bombings. He made his guiding principle that he would never help the Israelis to kill, he would help them to save lives. And he stuck by that, as far as I know, throughout the time since then. He spent 10 years helping the Israelis as a sort of double agent, saving lives. And he then went to America, where he's been relatively quiet after he published the book, until October the 7th, when he decided to speak out very publicly in the media. So the reason I say he's an amazing booking for them, and it's shameful that they even tried to cancel him before he arrived, is that there is no one else on the planet, I think, who can speak so openly from a position of deep involvement in Hamas and deep involvement in Israeli security services to prevent Hamas killings, and who has then gone on to study massively on his own account Islam, Christianity, Judaism, philosophy, geopolitics. The guy is incredibly well informed. I had, over the course of those 2 days that we spent a lot of time together, really deeply interesting conversations with him, 1.5 hours of which I recorded as an interview with him, and that's available on my YouTube. And again, I have never heard him speak as he did in that interview. He was he is clear and insightful in what is not a first language. So this guy stood up to give a speech at the Oxford Union. As soon as he did, they yelled at him, Sharmut. That in itself is, it's pretty shameful. He was jeered and heckled throughout, in Arabic and in English. They did not want him to speak. They didn't want to listen, but they didn't want him to speak. Then at one point, he uttered the words, "The Palestinian people are the most pathetic people in the world." At which point, all hell broke loose. A guy who said he's Palestinian in the audience stood up and said he was personally insulted. Though again, I would argue it wasn't personal insult, it was actually a general insult, for what that's worth. He said that under the rules of the union, Mosab should be kicked out. The president then engaged in this peculiar form of trying to keep control, but not really, and threatened to kick him out.
Wait a second. Is this president the same guy who debated against you?
Yes, he is.
So the guy who debates, who is against your team, is the one who's supposed to make the decision if he kicks Hassan out or not?
Yes.
Okay, that's crazy.
He chaired the entire debate except the bit where he spoke against us. And he filled the room with who he thought should be in there. He's the one that refused to speak to us at the dinner he invited us to. He's the one who declined to have a group photo with both teams and him before the debate, as is traditional for hundreds of years in the Oxford Union. He is the one who set the stage and the scene for this appalling, abusive evening. So, yes, He then said that he would consider kicking out Mosab. In fact, at the time I heard that he was going to kick him out. In the release of the video they've done, there are some words there that sound like he said he may kick him out if he does it again. Though I don't know anyone who was in the room who heard that exact phrase. So
No,
that could
he said that, but I think he also said that he will kick him out or something like that. And then some people were defending
yes.
Musab, and
So
he told them,
because we all heard that he was kicking him out,
yeah,
Natasha Hausdorff, who is also speaking on my team, and her sister, who was there as her guest, both of them spoke to the president and suggested that he shouldn't be kicked out. I mean, as I told you, they tried to kick out my husband for filming the abuse I was receiving.
now I understand it's her sister, because I saw a girl standing up and speaking, and it was Natasha's voice, but it wasn't Natasha.
Yeah, they look quite alike as well, but
Yeah, okay.
they're both very passionate on this topic, very knowledgeable on this topic. So actually, they stood up admirably to say that it's not really reasonable to try and kick him out, neither for what he said nor having invited him there in the first place, albeit reluctantly. So that was that. They agreed not to kick him out. He did finish his speech, and then he played an absolutely masterful stroke, in my opinion, which is he said to them, he explained to them who he was. He explained to them the story I just told you about how he saved lives, a great risk to himself. And then he said, "So do you want to teach me a lesson on morality? How many of you in this room, if you had known about October the 7th, if you'd had details about it before it took place, would have informed the authorities to help prevent the loss of human lives?" And virtually nobody in the room put up their hand. I put up my hand. We put up our hands. Virtually nobody. And he said, this indicates support of terrorism, because it does. If you knew about
Not just that, it indicates that you don't really care about the so-called genocide that you're voting on today, right? Because if you think it's so terrible that this happened, then you would have reported it in hindsight, right?
Well,
Or
I mean, you're right, I suppose, in that sense, that if they had reported it, it would have prevented October the 7th, which would have prevented what they considered to be a genocide in Gaza afterwards as a reaction. If only for that, you're right, maybe they should have reported it. But what
yeah,
it effectively means, if you think it through in those terms, is that they actually think that was all worthwhile. Whatever.
it could also mean another thing. It could mean that they know that if one of them raises his or her hand, then the others would just call him Sharmut, right?
Possibly. Well, and by the way, that's another symptom of what I see as a broader problem, which is kind of groupthink or sheep-like behaviour. Again, I have made a career discussing contentious issues, not just this one, and debating and through intellectual discussion, because I think it's just it's what makes us as humans able to come up with decisions and thoughts on complex issues and dilemmas. If you're afraid to express an opinion because of the condemnation you might get for it, or because you feel it will make you stand out, I would argue that you need to examine carefully whether you think your opinion is wrong. Now, if you conclude that it's not wrong, maybe it's easy to say, but I think many of us prove that we mean it when we act accordingly. You have a responsibility to express that view. If you really believe you're right, you should express the view, argue it clearly, try to persuade others even if you want to. So not to put up your hand because you're afraid of what the mob will think of you is, I think, not a valid defense. I personally think they meant it. They wouldn't have done if they'd heard that was happening. And I think that said everything about those people in that room, and that's what Mosab said. And at the end of the day, we all knew what the vote was going to be when they walked out of the door. They had to walk out of the way it works. You walk out on one side for agree and one side for disagree. Nobody went into that room expecting that we would win that vote. But the real vote that mattered that night was the one that Mosab held, the show of hands over who effectively supported the October the 7th atrocities. And the answer was all of them. And the president didn't seem himself to feel differently when I suggested that he should somehow censure Miko Peled for his suggestion that October the 7th was heroic. The president didn't censure him for that. He did censure Mosab for saying the Palestinian people are the most pathetic people in the world. Mosab incidentally doesn't define himself as a Palestinian, but by all definitions of those who do, he is the son of a Palestinian terrorist leader. The word pathetic itself actually isn't that deeply offensive. It means
No, it was obvious when you listen to what happened there. It was obvious that this guy was just trying to look for an excuse to kick him out, right? Because that guy stands up and said, Mosab says, well, you can argue if it was maybe in poor taste, but he says, the most pathetic people on earth. And then that guy stands up and said, he personally insulted me. He insulted me personally. I mean, he didn't insult you personally. You know that he didn't insult you personally. I mean,
that guy stood up at several points during the debate, and he has every right to offer his thoughts and opinions. He said he grew up in Gaza, which I suppose was why he did so. So again, I mean, actually, it's great to have him there. I would have enjoyed having a discussion, an open and fair discussion with him. And if anything, I wish he had maybe given the second speech as a student speaker rather than the Egyptian president. Because maybe he would have a much more interesting perspective. But, pathetic literally means arousing pity through vulnerability and sadness. Now, I don't actually think in that sense of the word, many people would disagree that the Palestinians are arousing pity. They are perhaps the most pitied people in the world at the moment. Some would say unfairly so, when there are others elsewhere being treated far worse and slaughtered in very high numbers. But, fine, they took offense at it, that it meant, miserable, inadequate, low standard. I get that. It was not worthy of kicking him out. Certainly it was not more worthy than kicking out Miko Peled for potentially breaking the law. And the union has kind of admitted that they think he might have broken the law by cutting that bit out of his speech. That's the point. They've been utterly disingenuous throughout. It was a bunch of small-minded, thuggish, mafia-like people trying to disgrace or embarrass or somehow kick Jews and in fact Arabs and pro-Israel people. And I think on that they gloriously failed. That we may have felt that mood in the room that night, but the whole world has seen through that, seen what these people are, and I think that they failed utterly. I think that Ibrahim was an utter failure in that, and I hope I really do hope that it gives him pause for thought and that it has some sort of impact on the decisions he makes in the future, because I think it was a shameful way to act. I suspect it won't. I suspect, in the circles he wishes to move, maybe he will be seen as some sort of hero as well.
Well, I think you did a great job, and I should thank you also for going up there and, speaking, and you did a great job. How can people find you if they want to hear more from you or follow you on various social media? So
I'm on X as John Sack, JONSAC. I'm on YouTube. Hopefully you can include the link in the description to my channel, Jonathan Sacerdoti. It's a hard name to spell, but I'm the only one in the world, so you'll find me, JONATHAN.
Yeah, I'll link it.
CERDOTI. And I'm on Instagram, I'm on television, I write in various media. So if you're interested, that's all good. And there's even a WhatsApp group if you're really interested where you can have...
So you could actually link me everything, and I'll,
I will do.
I'll put it in
the
description.
Thanks for having me on it. I mean, listen, I think that the work people like you are doing in holding open, honest discussions and debates and listening to other people's thoughts is so important. And as a philosopher and a thinker yourself, you are in a very good position to shepherd those discussions and to help people gain a deeper understanding. And I would just like to end, if I may, in saying that as well as debate, which I think is an important thing we need to be able to do in life, I want people to be able to disagree calmly and politely with one another, even on really sensitive and emotive subjects. And I also want to make it fashionable to change your mind again. I think that the internet is full of videos of so-and-so destroying so-and-so or schooling someone or other. And actually, there's nothing wrong with developing your thoughts and even changing your mind if you hear something that is persuasive and based on fact, empirical evidence and solid logical argument. And that's what I learned that day at the Oxford Union, is there are so many people who consider it the biggest shame to listen to someone else, to think about what they said, and even to consider that it might be right. So I hope that people watching that video will reconsider that tendency.
Jonathan Sacerdoti, thank you so much for coming on, and thanks for agreeing to speak to me.